Des, thanks a million for being with us today. As I mentioned, you were a very popular speaker back in 2019, so we're thrilled to have you here today, and it's really great to get your insights. I suppose, where I'd like to start is kind of almost on a European level, Des, the European tech ecosystem and how fascinating the last few years have been, maybe even since we were talking. So, is European tech having a moment in your view, Des?
I hope it's not a moment. I think what has changed has just been a maturing. I think Europe was probably lagging a little bit behind Silicon Valley or America more generally. And I think that lag showed up in the lack of startups, the immaturity of the funding ecosystem, the lack of experienced, tenured folks. And by that I mean Europe has never struggled, in my opinion, to have great engineers, great designers, etc. It's actually, I think, if anything, it's outperforming in that regard. I think what we just lack is people who've scaled businesses, massive B2B or B2C businesses, and led massive sales teams or massive support teams or all of the other essential ingredients of a business. They haven't been in Europe, but I do. So when I say it's not having a moment, it's not that Europe is I don't think Europe's hot right now. I think Europe is now right, and it's hot. And that's the way I'd characterize it. So I hope what we'll see is it to graduate further from here. There are still areas where it can improve. There are still it's not, I don't think we need new initiatives. I just think we need to let companies grow up, succeed, spit out mature talent effectively to go and start more companies, and then the cycle will continue. That's certainly how it played out in America.
And I think, if I'm correct, we're at about 32 unicorns in Europe now. So, I remember people talking about, when are the unicorns, other than one or two, going to come out of Europe? Just because we're here in Dublin, what about Ireland itself? You're one of, I think, is it 6 unicorns coming out of Ireland at the moment? I think you predicted when you were talking back in the Web Summit that there would be 2 more in the coming 3 months, and sure enough, you were right. What about Ireland and how it fits into that European ecosystem? 6 out of 32 ain't bad.
It's not. Part of me is, I'm trying to which are the other 3 that make up the 6? I suspect it's I presume we're including Intercom, Stripe, Flipdish, Wayflyer. I'm probably offending somebody by forgetting them here, but sorry, Workhuman, great. And one more, anyone? Anyway, whatever. What? Sorry. Okay, cool.
I'm not sure if that is the 6.
Yeah. So that's 6. That's great. I would say I think the 32 figure sounds low, honestly. But there's no reason why it's not 10. There's no law of physics here that stops it. We're not going to hit. We shouldn't accept any limit on that figure. Everyone who wants to start a startup should have aspirations of it being a $1 billion business. The sober part of me wants to say, let's look at the stock markets and let's look at what's happened to SaaS over the last while, and let's make sure that these valuations hold and don't actually become a guillotine of sorts for the companies. But no, more generally, I think the message I'd really urge to Irish startups is just to forget about the Irish part of your business and think of yourself as a global business. Don't obsess about being popular in the Irish tech scene or thinking about yourself as Irish in any way, shape or form. At the very least, you're European, not Irish, but more generally, you're a global company. It's not, the whole point of the internet is that people don't have to fly to Ireland to consume your product. So you have a global market, you have a good product, and you should have very credible ambition of realizing hundreds of millions in revenue and thus billions or tens of billions in value. I think that's well within the grasp of any Irish company. The reason I didn't know about the rounds that were closing at the time of Web Summit, I knew about the trajectory of companies, and I think when somebody said, "Oh, Des, you called it right," I wasn't "Oh, well done, Des," or whatever, but I actually did say I think there'll be at least one more, is my guess, this year. However, I didn't anticipate the sort of the stock apocalypse that we've gone through, so it's possible it might be another year.
Yeah, no, it's true, isn't it? It's true. And I suppose, it is a kind of a risky time at the moment, isn't it? Like things could change fairly radically, given the current circumstances.
They can't get much worse.
Well, no, you would hope, Des. I think I said that after the pandemic. That was the only problem.
Yeah.
So, and then they landed a war on us. So it has been interesting times. I'd like to explore a little bit, though, where people are saying that our rate of, and this is the last time I'll mention the word, but our rate of growth of unicorns in Europe is double what it is in the US at the moment. Again, I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of the stats that are out there. Where is that boom coming from? I mean, there's something has shifted, no doubt about it. Is it that maturity of people coming out of companies and starting their own companies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily accept the data, but I'll answer the question anyway, which is like our rate of growth has doubled, but we're coming from a much smaller base, right? So like it's that's not particularly like it's not a relevant figure to compare. Where is it coming from? If we just say like, hey, it looks like there's lots of good companies being formed in Europe right now. Where's that coming from? I think like it's a lot more credible to stay in Europe and build a large software company now than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. This whole era is still quite young. Like if you take like the idea of a lot of these large companies fall into the category of SaaS, right? And what that means is software that's delivered online where you pay monthly or yearly, but it's like a subscription of sorts, as opposed to the old days where you're like buying DVDs or CDs and getting them pressed at a factory and all that, right? And that whole SaaS movement really started in like 2003, 2004 with Salesforce. And so we're really talking like max 2 decades. Yeah. And then of this era, you could really consider it the last 10 years of like, let's just say good SaaS, as opposed to like SaaS that made use of the internet, as opposed to like recreating what was once on the desktop is now in the URL. This is much more like, hey, given that like me and you are online at the same time, maybe we can see what each other are doing when we're editing a document, like that type of SaaS. So I think that's still only a decade old. So I think, a lot of people are realizing that there are no barriers to entry in the sense of if you can code and design and engineer and market and sell, you have a good chance of building a large business. And once the difference between like, the reason people flock, I think, to the internet and to building software companies is just there's unbounded scalability and massive margins. So like if you're really good at carpentry and you're really good at making chairs and you make 10 chairs a day, at some point you can make a factory, and then at some other point you can make a second factory and a third factory. But like, decades of your life will pass while you're scaling like that. Same with restaurants, or same with most like normal jobs in a sense. The difference with like SaaS is like you put that chair online and everyone can sit on it at the same time in a sense, right? Like, and they all pay you individually for it. And like that, so that affords you this insane ability to like deliver a lot of value to the world and thus capture a lot of value and charge a lot of money and blah, 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 for like a one-time heavy lift in a sense. And I think what's happening is, I don't think it's a European kink in a sense. I just think it's like people are realizing, shit, that's a great way to run a business,
Yeah, without question. And I mean, you mentioned there, we're talking about SaaS and, things like e-commerce is huge, and many of those unicorns are in that kind of general area. What are the sort of sectors that you think are really hot at the moment, or even the verticals within SaaS?
I think like the answer I'm supposed to give you is like Web3 and the metaverse and crypto and all that sort of stuff.
You're not supposed to give any answer, I promise.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like that's the official polished like answer that one would give. I don't like. I think a lot of that area is still figuring itself out. Yeah. Much like the .com companies were in like 2003, 4, 5, 6 or whatever. And like if you look at what happened then, generally like a lot of those like ridiculous ideas have like, it turns out we're just a bit early. And I think we're going to see the same with stuff like NFTs and a lot of cryptocurrency. It's not that they're wrong, it's just they're probably a bit early. Like we're not ready for it yet. Yeah. Like when people were trying to like, pets.com was once a laughing stock. It's now like a multi-billion-dollar business, but everyone's like, oh, well, we don't care. The original narrative is better, right? What do I actually think is credible? I do, like I've been playing with an Oculus device. I do think there is something to that like idea of immersive experiences. I don't want to go full metaverse or whatever, but like just something in the space of a far more immersive way to like engage in the internet. And I think someone will build something impressive there. That you know, if you're asking specifically what's a hot space, I think what you're seeing is like a flurry of investment into the early stage of like Web3 startups and all that sort of stuff. I think the reason people are going there is because everything else is kind of underwater right now, whereas if you're investing in an early company in a new technology, you've at least a decade, so you don't need to worry about where the market is today, you actually care about where it is in 2028. If I had to bet on like new areas where I think new stuff will emerge and be successful, I'd say metaverse is definitely one. I think people using the new form of AI to deliver new types of value. So when I say the new form, I mean, there's a group called the OpenAI Institute who produce technologies like the GPT-3 and DALL-E and all these things that you can Google and find out. But it's like, it's generally into like the scary sort of AI in a sense, where like you can create a fake person, give it a fake face, put it in a fake environment, animate it, give it a fake voice, have it write fake music, give it an entirely fake background, and you can ask it questions and it'll give you really fake answers that are really, really, really compelling. And we're getting really close to like powerful artificial general intelligence. I think people will use that tech to build really cool stuff, and I think I'm starting to see the beginnings of startups saying we're applying this level of smarts to this really common problem, and that can be anything from like content moderation to like vision recognition to like, you know, health tech or whatever, where people are. I mean, even right down to like the offside rule in soccer is it turns out is something that AI can probably solve for us, you know, like so I think you're going to see a lot of that type of stuff. And then generally like I still think the area that like Intercom is in is nowhere like, and I don't mean by that, I just mean B2B SaaS, so software as a service where you build products for businesses and they use them. I still think that's, you know, has like, you know, decades to run, and I think it's like in a lot of ways a slightly safer, like low volatility bet. But you know, we're still, you know, most business is still not online. Most software is still shit, you know, so like there's a long way to run yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just in case there is anyone there who doesn't know exactly what Intercom does, do you want to just give a very quick, I probably should have asked you that at the beginning. I'm sure most people know, but.
Yeah, no problem. We built Intercom to solve a problem, which is that when you have an internet business, that is somewhere where you do majority of your engagement with your customers online, it was and has been very difficult to engage with your customers. So what Intercom is a customer communication platform that lets you talk to your customers when they're in your product, on your website, or outside of that, so by email or push or like Instagram or WhatsApp or whatever makes sense. The whole product is centered around the idea that talking to your customers is a good thing and letting them talk to you is a good thing. And we've been basically pulling that thread since 2011. And it turns out, I guess, the market has proved us to be correct, because we have now 25,000 customers paying us hundreds of millions of dollars to use the technology. We're about 950 people in the company, and we're in 5 offices, but it's all centered around the core insight that talking to customers is a good idea, and we should make it easier, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you about as well is, like, you know, we've been kind of sort of been growing in parallel to the tech industry in Ireland, and I mean, I remember looking back in the early days, there were so many companies that had their kind of sales and marketing here, but their R&D elsewhere, you know, could have been anywhere, or back in the US or wherever it might be. Companies like Stripe and like Intercom have kind of led the way in having R&D functions here in Ireland. Now, my guess would be that has contributed to you know, the startup ecosystem in Ireland and people coming out of those companies. Was it a challenge to set up R&D here, or did we have the talent here? And has it, do you think, contributed to people moving on and out and doing their own startups?
Yes, and yes. So, but that's a very blunt answer. So, I think it was. One of our big advantages has been the talent in Ireland, being able to tap into that. And I think we were doing it at a time when there wasn't as much of a how would you say, movement around building modern web, modern software, if you like. And then I think centering R&D in Ireland, so it's not like a lot of companies say, we'll have an R&D office in Ireland. That's not what Intercom is. R&D is in Ireland, full stop. Now we have a London office that rolls up to Ireland as well, but it's not the case that we all fall into like the real R&D team back in San Francisco or whatever. And I think that distinction remains. Like there are lots of like, whether it's like Zendesk or HubSpot or whoever, Stripe or whatever, like, ultimately like the difference with Intercom, I think, is that our R&D headquarters is actually here.
Yeah.
And I think that has been a massive advantage for us, genuinely. It is probably also like, in loads of ways, I think we've benefited from the Irish, tech scene in a sense. And I think in loads of ways we've similarly given back. The benefits of just being like the fact that we could actually tap into that labor force and grow and scale here. And then I think the ways in which we've given back have been either like the people who leave Intercom and go and start their own companies, or more generally, I think we've done a lot, or we've invested a lot, because you have to bear in mind it's a very symbiotic relationship. We need the Irish tech scene to be successful so that we can also hire more people from it. So we do a lot in terms of like whether it's talks or like events. We're quite open in sharing how we work and what we work on and all that sort of stuff. And we'll continue to do that, even right down to, say, our partnership with the University of Limerick, where we're designing that immersive software engineering course with Stripe. We're generally speaking very long Irish tech. We think it's gonna have a bright future, and we're hopefully gonna be a big part of it for a long time.
And tell me a little bit about that. We had an article on Silicon Republic recently about startups coming out of Intercom. Literally, some amazing people that have kind of, and you encourage it. You don't worry that people leave and start something else. I believe it's part of your culture to almost encourage that at Intercom.
Yeah, well, I would say embrace rather than encourage.
Well, sorry, you don't want them to leave, obviously.
We're not actually, I'm not running around telling people, here, let me help you with an idea so you can get out of here. I think generally any startup needs like a lot of core people to think like startup founders to be successful. Mm-hmm. That usually means like think like an owner. So like don't waste time, don't waste money, don't waste concentration on shit that doesn't matter, which is honestly something that can be quite rife as the company scales. People start inventing things to worry about, or like, just new like whether it's roles or drama or whatever, like, and the nice thing when you're a small company and you're watching your runway tick away and you realize you're all going to be like, you won't be able to pay your staff in like 6 months time. It's quite focusing. Mm-hmm. So you generally want people to have that sort of startup mindset. It trickles into other stuff like fighting for usage. Like you want your product team who works on the new inbox feature to really care if people use it or not, and to not be detached from the work. So you kind of try and foster that startup mindset into people. Knowing that for a certain few, and it's not everyone, and I don't want to over-celebrate like it either, because like most startups don't work out. Yep. Like we have probably like a dozen startup companies coming out of Intercom, and I won't name any of them, and I think they're all high caliber and like I've invested in many of them and all that sort of stuff, but they're not immune to the law that most startups don't work out. Yep. And we should just, so like, it's not the case that these people are like doing stuff that like only they're capable of. Like, let's see what happens, right? But I do think we do try to like foster that sort of foundery mindset of like, this is my thing, I feel a lot of pride in it, and I really want it to work. And then sometimes when people grow that skill and that mindset, and then they see another problem that is not in the Intercom landscape, like, so let's say it could be something that's not about customer communication, and they really care about that, they can't get rid of that like itch that like is like, someone should build this and I'm someone, and so off they go. Hopefully they don't take a lot of Intercom people with them, but like, when I say we embrace it, knowing that it's a likely thing that will happen when you hire for that sort of mindset, and when you try to like normalize that sort of mindset. It's a likely byproduct, but you take the rough with the smooth, because the people are like, phenomenal when they're here, and like we wish them the best when they leave. But like there are also people who have that mindset who still work in Intercom and do amazing work and go on and have like an insane career and honestly get a lot more experience seeing things at a lot more scale as well. So it's it is kind of like career choices are hard.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I do think it's a really salutary lesson for many people. Is that not everybody should be running a startup, and yeah, it's only a fraction of them that are successful. So yeah, you need to have a pretty unique idea. I remember one of the very first talks I saw you doing, Des. I certainly had no wrinkles or grey hairs at the time, so it was a long time ago. Was around product and service development, and it just completely resonated with me, and we've probably applied those rules to our company culture all the way through. And it's exactly that idea of not getting distracted and going off on sort of tangents, but on your product focus. Do you mind just repeating a little bit about that? I just love your thoughts on product development and service development.
If the talk was 10 years ago, there's a chance I won't be able to.
But I mean, even your thoughts now really is more about
that. Well, I think like for startups specifically, I think everyone has read like their favorite blog post about focus or do one thing and do it well, more wood behind fewer arrows, you name it. There's like a dozen different similes, whatever. What they don't realize is just how like awfully ruthless you have to be about that in the early stage. And it's like it can be annoying at times knowing that you have to do it. Like where you have a really so in Intercom's case we had a very clear idea of what it is we're trying to do, and there are loads of peripheral great ideas in the Intercom space, but they are peripheral, and it can be it doesn't feel great to be constantly running around trying to shut down things that are like not what we're trying to work on. But it's like focus is essential. You kind of like Owen, our chairman now, former CEO, used to always say like our lives are really short and our careers are really short, and the lifespan of this company, if we don't do it well, it's also going to be really, really short. The idea that we can also we can somehow tolerate like loads of distractions along with the thing we're trying to do is just bananas. And I think so. Generally speaking, I spend a lot of time telling startups to refine what they're doing and cut down what they're doing and stop expanding and having all these crazy, and also it's a blah. And you see this a lot of pitch decks as well. People say well, we're going to do B time tracking, but we're also doing X, Y, and Z and P, Q, and R. And that sounds great because you're expanding your total addressable market and making a very credible claim that we're definitely in $1 trillion market. But it's kind of nonsense because it's well, what are you going to do today? Oh, you're doing that little thing. Well, then stop talking about everything else. So generally, that's the idea of focus, which is it is kind of it's almost a cliche to talk about. So if I was to try and be more specific, what I'd say is a method we use for product development a lot is called jobs to be done, which is when you go to your customers and you find the most literal, specific thing that they are really trying to accomplish by using your product, and you hear them out on that, and you design and engineer entirely around that. And if you search for jobs to be done, you'll find a wave of material around it now. It was novel when we started talking about it in 2012, but the idea being simply only listen to your customer, only look at what they're exactly really trying to do. Don't use any middlemen or abstractions or anything. Just be really literal and specific about what the actual purpose of their usage of your product is, and invest all your innovation, all your energy in being world class at that. And when you can do that well, and that is a very focusing statement, that's when you'll actually nail the job for that customer. As long as that customer isn't a really weird edge case, right? As long as they actually are generally a repeatable thing, like a head of marketing who's trying to grow traffic or whatever, right? Then I think you can really build great software. I think the very second you let narratives or abstractions get in the way, that's when you start building things that are just that one or two clicks further away from what the person's actually trying to do. And it's kind of like a form of premature optimization. And I think the risk is you'll probably never get to the midterm where all this like optimization will pay off. Like you actually have to make sure you nail the job first, basically.
You remembered it very well from over 10 years ago, by the way, and that was exactly what I was getting at. And I know it might seem incredibly obvious and still obvious to you, but it is, I still think it's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard on building anything, to be perfectly honest. It's not just about startups. It's just that focus and the way you describe it. Just in that context as well, I do want to, because there are people here who are, starting out or already founders or going to be founders, or running businesses. They may not be officially startups, as they say. I'd just love to hear if there were other lessons from you, from whether it's failures, whether it's challenges, what was really good, what you learned, I suppose, if you don't mind sharing some of your wisdom with us today, Des.
I'll share some of the more counterintuitive things, like things I learned that were actually opposite of what I thought. One of them is like, if you need your entire team to buy into a decision, and you can afford to, sometimes you're better off just letting things break so that like everyone can see, like as an example, let's say you wanted to bring in like a new layer of management or performance management or like a structured way to do compensation reviews or something like that. Oftentimes you introduce these things and they just sound like abstract middle management MBA type BS that no one wants, right? And I think you can do generally speaking in life, people won't buy a solution until they've bought a problem. So you want them to actually experience the problem. So I've spent time saying like, oh, such and such isn't understanding blah. And I'm like, well, I think we've tried explaining it. Let's just let it break on them, and then they're going to come back. And sure enough, like it could be like weeks later or months later, they're like, "Hey, all this shit isn't working anymore." And I'm like, now you're ready. And like, there's a lovely quote by Clay Christensen where he said, "Questions are places in the mind where answers can fit, or they can attach." And he likens it to like Velcro. If you don't actually have the question, or in this case, the problem, the solutions that people try and tell you just bounce right off. So there's somebody out there in the crowd right now who's not getting this because their business is humming and everything's going perfectly, and they're like, what's he talking about? And there's somebody else who's going, that's what's going wrong in my place right now. I should have let that thing broken or whatever. And that's an example of this. Like, advice only resonates when you're ready to hear it. It's like I'm a relatively new parent. I have a 6-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. And I find with the 3.5-year-old, I can't tell her anything until she's made a mistake. And once she's made a mistake, then she's all ears. But like, it's really, really hard to explain why you shouldn't run as fast as you can down the stairs. You can explain that in the abstract theory, but nothing clears it up like a bloody nose, and like that's how companies work. Another one I'd say is like people are faced with like trying to deliver nuanced messages to their company all the time. So one example would be like, we want to be profitable, but we also want to invest in the future. Or we want to build new product, but we also want to fix all the bugs. And as a result, you as leaders often have to stand up in front of the org and give some sort of message, which is like, we want to be profitable, but not too profitable. Or we want to fix all the bugs, but not all of them, or whatever, right? And you're trying to come up with this weird, like, hedged, split the difference type message. And what happens is, your best people kind of just get what you mean, and the rest are kind of like, I have to now come back to Des or whoever every single time I'm faced with a do I do X or Y. I need to be like, is this an example where you said it was a good trade-off or not, or whatever? And something I think this is originally, I read about it from Shopify, but our actual Paul Adams, who's our chief product officer, used to talk about this a lot, like the idea of just let the pendulum swing. Like, let's just be extreme about like whatever it is, bug fixing for a quarter, or like let's just really like go all in on innovation for a quarter, and then next quarter we can come back, or in 2 quarters we'll come back and go into extreme reparation mode, like where we go and fix all the mistakes we made. The idea of that is 2 things. One is like there's so much more clarity at either end of the pendulum that the message you then give as a leader, while time boxed, is simply, any business needs to care about profit and it needs to care about investing in the future. Right now, we're caring about profit, the latter half of this year, we'll care about investment in the future or whatever, right? But there's so much more clarity, and it's such an easier message. And then your job is just basically to make sure that like the average of all of your outbound messages to your org nets out to the point you wanted to make, which is like, we need to hedge our bets, or we need, and I think a lot of folks go wrong writing up really nuanced, beautiful communication and expecting like 700 people to kind of get it. A point I often say on that is just like, if you want people to make the same decisions you would make, they need all of the same data and all of the same context and all of the same kind of decision-making experience framework that you have. Otherwise, they can't replicate your decision-making framework. So you have to work out when, like, how much transparency makes sense. So how much data can you give everyone? And sometimes you just can't. You're in positions where like, hey, we can't share everything about everything to everyone. So in those cases, when you can't, because you can't share literally everything, or the people you're working with maybe are just too junior, too early in their career or whatever, such that like even if you gave them all the material, they wouldn't come to the right answer. You just need to give them the direction. And the direction, as I said, you're better off not giving them a nuanced direction. Nuance is expensive. It's expensive both in writing and also in receiving, whereas the pendulum swing stuff is actually pretty clear. We're doing this, and then we're going to do that. And I think it's counterintuitive, because you always like to think that it sounds dumb to be like, let's swing from extreme to extreme, and the employees will be like, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. But like, it's actually better to be like, I do know what I'm doing. We're going to swing from extreme to extreme, and that's just it sounds more manic, but it's actually more sane, I think.
I love it. It's great. I can't believe our time's up, Des. Thanks a million for being with us. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope you're sticking around for a while. I'm sure people would love to.
For sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Des.